Welcome to a new episode of Arbitration Life. I am Janet Bryn.
And I'm Hana Dumal.
As a supporting organization, the BVI IAC is looking forward to Canada Arbitration Week 2022, called CanArb Week, which takes place from 19 to 21 of October in Montreal.
CanArb Week is in its third year, and it will feature exciting sessions and highlight new developments with a focus on looking forward.
Our guest today is the founding co-chair of CanArb Week. She is an independent arbitrator with chambers at Toronto Arbitration Chambers, Atkin Chambers in London, and Sydney Arbitration Chambers. She is also professor of law and past associate dean of Osgoode Hall Law School, York University. In 2020, she received the title of Distinguished Research Professor from York University from her commitment to excellence and international leadership in the fields of private international law, procedural law, comparative law, and international commercial arbitration.
She has served as sole presiding and co-arbitrator in commercial and treaty investment arbitrations administered by the ICC, ICDR, DIAC, HKIAC, the PC, and SIAC, as well as ad hoc arbitration in a variety of seats. She was the 2018 recipient of the CanArb Canada Award for Distinguished Service, and in 2021, she was appointed to the Order of Canada for her expert legal authority in commercial arbitration and conflict of laws, and for advancing legal procedural standards in Canada. She is regularly recognized in Who's Who Legal Canada, Who's Who Arbitration Thought Leaders, Chambers and Partners, and Best Lawyers for her work as arbitrator since 2010. And she's an executive editor of the Canadian Journal of Commercial Arbitration. Please welcome Professor Janette Walker. Hi, Janette. Welcome to Arbitration Live. How are you?
Delighted to be here. I'm not sure if you were saying Janette or Janet.
Oh, yes, sorry.
How do you pronounce your name? How do you pronounce your name?
Janet.
Janet. Okay, yeah. I pronounce mine the same, but obviously I have the double T. All right.
Well, it's good to see you, Janet. Not Janet Bryn, Janet Walker. We're really happy to have you. So how are things in Canada at the moment? You're in Toronto, right?
I am, and it's a wonderful time of the year. The fall is always sort of crisp and sunny and lovely. It's one of my favorite times. And we're coming up to Canadian Thanksgiving, which is the first weekend, second Monday in October. So not this weekend, but the next one.
Nice. That's exciting. So any plans? It's like American Thanksgiving with family, friends?
Absolutely. I don't know that it has quite the same sort of significance as it does, it's sort of fabled in the US, but it's very much a family holiday. And it's a time when people who have cottages that aren't winterized will close up the cottages, take their boats out of the water. So it's kind of an end of the summer celebration.
Oh, nice. That's
nice.
Exciting.
Any reason to get together with family is always a good one.
Exactly.
So I'll go ahead and get started. How did you get started in arbitration? Did you choose arbitration or did arbitration choose you?
Wow. Well, let me say it was both. It was love at first sight, I think, hopefully on both sides. But it wasn't until a little bit later than it is for many people these days. Went to university, then got a graduate degree, then got married and was a stay-at-home mom for about 8 years. So I did a little bit of a walk on that side of life and never sorry that happened. 3 children have sort of grown and prospered. But it was only then that I went and took a law degree and then a graduate degree in law, and then worked in private practice for a short time, and then was a professor that suddenly the opportunity came to me to build a career in arbitration. And for me, I was specializing in private international law and comparative procedure. You have to remember, back in those days, there was no stable, steady, established arbitration practice or scholarship. So for me, practicing arbitration was like the performance art, was like putting together these two wonderful subjects that I had utterly been captivated by, and seeing how they worked in real life, in real time.
Nice.
Wow.
Amazing. You're a true testament that women can do it all.
Well, I'm not sure about that. I'm not sure if I can, but there are women out there who can.
But no, that's wonderful. And I think you touched upon my next question, but now I want to ask you, how was arbitration changed from the time you started compared to now?
Wow. I mean, it's hard to explain to people today how much it has changed. Certainly, it's become a field all on its own, with expertise, learning, techniques, shared understanding that is immense. So it is an actual field that you can go into. But socially and in terms of the arbitration community, that has also completely been transformed. And it's almost a generational kind of leapfrogging, over the next, so that, especially now coming out of the pandemic, seeing once again a whole new generational change in attitude, in demographics, and in everything. So for, back in the day, it was very much an old boys network, and, very much, a kind of an insider's thing. And many people were on the outside looking in. Not many very career paths. There really was only one path, and that was arbitrator. And nobody knew how to get from here, wherever that was, to there. But today it's transformed, and there are, very viable careers in counsel work, in tribunal secretary, in institutional administrator, in the field of academia, throughout the field of arbitration. And so it's really become a whole world.
So true. Absolutely.
So now, Janet, you are regarded highly as an arbitrator, and rightly so. In your opinion, what makes an arbitrator a good one?
That's a very difficult one. And it would be a mistake to imagine that it's, a single set of characteristics. The more I work with other arbitrators, the more I see wonderful things that they do, some of which would be good for me to emulate, some of which might not, because you do very much have to find your own style these days. I will say that just last week at ICA, there was a wonderful presentation by Melanie Van Leeuwen, who is the chair of the ICC Commission, on the 12 virtues, Aristotle's 12 virtues. And she explained how each of them could be modeled in some way by good arbitrators. And it was just very interesting to see all of these wonderful qualities. But I will say that the qualities that are identified by GAR by the Global Arbitration Review in its highest award, those of being best prepared and most responsive, I think those come through regardless of what your personal style is. So the more work you do as arbitrator to prepare yourself to know the case, to prepare yourself to identify issues that might be on the horizon for the procedure, to be able to respond as promptly as you possibly can and as effectively as you can, the better you are as an arbitrator.
Sounds like some really good advice. Thank you for that.
Thank you. And I want to ask you, Janette, as a professor of law and past associate dean of Osgoode Hall Law School at York University, would you say that your role as professor enhances your role as arbitrator? And if yes, how?
I would say absolutely. As a specialist in private international law, it gave me a chance over many years, about 25 years, to serve as an expert. And that gave me sort of a firsthand appreciation of the witness examination process from the perspective of the witness. So that gives me an insight into what's going on in the hearing from that, in that role. But it also gave
That's
me,
very interesting. So the first time you went in an arbitration, you were an expert?
well, exactly, not exactly.
Wow.
The first time I was a participant in a hearing, the first time I was regularly a participant in civil litigation, it was in that role. So, but witness examination is witness examination.
Yeah.
Whether it's in cross-border litigation or arbitration, it's not so very different. So that gave me a sense for that. But also, I had the opportunity to lead the advocacy program, the mooting program. And, for 13 years, also, I was a coach for the VIS-Moot team. So, young budding members of the arbitration community. So that gave me a real opportunity to get an insight into the way in which counsel work, the challenges that they face in developing their written and oral advocacy. So now I had a sense, from that of what the task of, was of counsel. But also it gave me a chance to study the field and reflect on it and to read broadly. And also, frankly, I must say, from a logistical standpoint, it gave me a little bit of freedom in my schedule. So, counsel have wonderful opportunities to make networks, but boy, their time must be first and foremost dedicated to the not always predictable, but real-time demands of their practice. I had a little bit more of a measured and flexible series of demands in my quote unquote day job. So that gave me an opportunity to develop as arbitrator.
This is wonderful. And thank you for mentioning the VIS-Moot, because we have a lot of guests that mention it. And I don't think we stress enough how important it is to do mooting, and even for you, like us actually seeing a lot of teams going through it, how important it was also in your career. I think that's wonderful.
Absolutely. I was sorry I was never had the opportunity to be a mooter at the VIS, but I sort of enjoyed the process very much vicariously through my students.
So, Janet, what difficulties have you experienced in your career and how did you overcome them?
Well, I'm not so sure that, I mean, look, everyone has challenges.
Mm-hmm.
I think I would say, certainly, depending on what your sort of entry point is, what your background profession is, you will face benefits and challenges associated with that. So, as I sort of mentioned a moment ago, counsel have the advantage if they're in a litigation, or especially if they're in an arbitration practice, of developing a network of people naturally in the course of their work who see their skills in that role, and who will then be able to say, oh, well, she knows about that field. We'll have confidence and we'll appoint her. I didn't really have that in quite the same way. Yes, I was an expert, but I was the person, being asked the questions. So I didn't have that same sort of capacity. And in fact, very early on, once again, in the sort of, very nascent period of arbitration in Toronto, a group of us created a small working group, if you will, called the Arbitration Roundtable of Toronto. And if I recall correctly, there were 9 gentlemen in private practice and me. And so when we would go to do our outreach and give our presentations, I would tease, the audience and present myself as the token academic. And that would always sort of get a bit of a laugh, which is only to say that, I don't need to be saying to you, Janette and Hana, that of course it hasn't been, women have not been an obvious choice for appointment as arbitrator for a long, until quite recently. And so it only in fact occurred to me quite recently that I would sort of fly myself around the world, all self-funded as an academic, staying in sort of second-rate hotels and, saving my pennies to make the registration fee, only to chat with people in a very pleasant way at many of the receptions, and only realizing much more recently that all of those people were very happy to talk with me, but had in no way had me on the radar as someone they would consider appointing. So although I did manage, one way or another to get appointments over the years, those are I think the challenges that many women and also many people who are of other socially, historically unrepresented groups or underrepresented groups, they're not seen as people who would be appointed as arbitrators. And that's work that we all have to do. And hopefully that we are all doing, as we progress.
Putting in the work.
We are, yes. Now, Janette, back to private international law and you work as an academic. You are the author of the main private international law text in Canada, which during your authorship has become the most cited private law work in Canadian courts, relied on in more than 400 decisions, which is extremely impressive. Could you please tell us more about working on this project?
I do a lot of writing, but that particular work, it's loose leaf and it's updated every 6 times a year. So it's a constant sort of effort. And if you're familiar with the subject of private international law, you'll know that it's a lot of little sort of pieces that go together. It's not just one sort of overarching subject. And as an academic, to maintain the coherence across those many topics is one great challenge. But for me, because it's loose leaf, for me, I sort of think of it as a little bit like gardening. So when the time comes to do the updating, I sort of go into the garden, roll up my sleeves. I do a little weeding here, taking out some old things. I do a little pruning there, sort of shaping the narrative to keep it updated. And I plant some more seeds here and there, always being sort of mindful that it's my sort of mandate to be, if you will, a steward of the law, a sort of if you will, a gardener of the law, and not, to sort of plant in some massive stake of something that's quite odd and inconsistent with what's going on. But there is a gentle sort of leadership and forward thinking that goes into that. But that's that work. I mean, there are many other writing projects, all of them quite different, speeches, articles, and so on. But that's that particular project. It's for me, it's sort of a kind of a mainstay over a long period of time.
That's wonderful. And I really love the gardening metaphor.
So Janet, earlier you shared with us that you're excited about Canada's Thanksgiving coming up. So another exciting thing coming up in Canada is CanArb, or Canada Arbitration Week, which you are the co-chair of the organizing committee. What are you most excited about this year's edition of CanArb?
I have to say, I'm absolutely thrilled because although it's our third CanArb week, it is our first in-person CanArb week. Now, I don't know what your experience has been, but my experience has been, in post-pandemic times, a little bit like when they went, now you might not remember this, but when they went from black and white to color, they went to a thing called Technicolor, and all of a sudden, everyone, there and really looking true to life and very impactful. So, but that's been my experience. So I think it will be a truly wonderful event when, finally after 3 years, we are together. I should just say, it was in the, just in the new year of 2019, 2020, when it suddenly occurred to me, Paris had one, London had one, New York had one, Singapore had one, Australia had one. What did they have that we didn't in Canada? And it was really an arbitration week. They're all different around the world. But for us, the vision has been to use it as an opportunity to give all of the Canadian arbitral organizations, whether they're professional organizations or institutions, or hearing centers, or even institutions, whatever they are, an opportunity to combine their forces in a sense, to give their members an opportunity to learn more about other organizations in Canada, but also to give folks from abroad a sense of what's going on, in Canada. So, I mean, all of that was sort of planned with great hopes in 2020. And then, of course, we had to pivot to being online. But now, finally, we will be in person and in Montreal, which is also, always an exciting place to go.
Well, that is certainly great. Yeah, in person is, it's very exciting. We can certainly relate. It's been a minute, yeah, for some of us.
I have to say on that, I remember the time back at the beginning of 2022 when I said, well, you know what, maybe this year the pandemic will ease and we'll be able, and people said to me, quite frankly, they said, well, number one, it won't end that quickly. Okay. But number two, they said, people, if they're not going to go in person to hearings, if they can make hearings work on Zoom, why would they invest the time, and trouble to go to an event that's a conference? They sort of thought, well, that's kind of second, it's down the tier in terms of order of significance in terms of your work. And, it's become, I think, clearer and clearer that although you can perhaps manage, not always ideally, but manage the formal hearing in this online format, there's nothing like being in person to get to know people and to see, how, who they are and, and what enlivens their work and to be able to anticipate being able to work with them. And so I think that kind of networking is, critical to be done in person. And I'm just thrilled that we're going to be doing it.
Yes, happy for you.
So true. It's so important. And now, Janette, what advice would you give to young lawyers wanting to start a career in arbitration? And do you also have advice for lawyers looking to get their first appointment as arbitrator?
Wow, that's a big one. The answer is probably yes and no, in the sense that the challenges for me back in the day were vastly different from the challenges for newer members of the community today. So in that sense, I'm sort of watching and learning how they achieve what they do. But I think that there is one thing that I would encourage them to keep in mind, and that is, I would say, do what you love and see where that takes you. And so, although once upon a time we may have had such a narrow and kind of monolithic sense of the field and careers in arbitration, that you felt you had to choose to do something and then find a way to get there, I think now younger people, newer people in the field should try out the many different things that they can. Working as tribunal assistant, or working in an institution, or working as counsel, whatever it is, and reflect on what it is that they love about it. I mean, it's a huge range of skill sets to be a good contributor to the process in whatever field, and they are very different skill sets. And so it's not, I think for someone to say, I think that the only and best thing to do is that, is to be an arbitrator, and therefore I have to find a way to, shoehorn myself into that kind of, set that kind of pattern to get there. It's not like that. So I say, try things out, do what you love, don't do what you don't love. I mean, which is not to say that, if you're doing what you love, there won't always be things that are a little bit more challenging. You'll hear, arbitrators saying, I love this except for the docketing, and professors saying, I love this except for the marking. There's always, and as well, I'm sure you'll hear counsel saying, I love this except for the proofreading, but, so there are sort of, technical challenges with everything that we do. But I say sort of, play to your strengths and then follow, what you really, really enjoy doing. That would be my only little bit of advice.
That's a great advice. That's a really, really good advice.
So now it's time for our bonus question.
Yes.
So with music being a universal language, we would love to know, what is a song that you're listening to that gets you started, gets you ready for an arbitration hearing, your big day? What gets you going?
Wow, wow. Now this is, I mean, there could be so many, I have to say, because, you know, I've been a music lover from the time I was a small child, you know, listening to everything from, you know, Mozart horn concertos, the concerti to, you know, to Ella Fitzgerald, to you name it. My father was a music lover, and so was I. We used to put the LPs on the, you know, the record player, and I'd just sit there on the couch and listen, fascinated, reading the album cover. So you know, what could I say? You know, it could be any number of things, because music will get me going. And very hard for me to think of a kind of a music or a genre of music that I wouldn't be inspired by. But I have to say that when I was, and this is going back a number of years, associate dean, and I was sort of anticipating a challenging day driving to the office. It would take me about 45 minutes to get to the law school. I would turn on, believe it or not, the Emperor Concerto, and listen to that from start to finish. And by the time you know, it was done, I was ready to face everything. I'd been through the triumphal moments. I'd been through the very thoughtful, you know, and sort of very quietly inspiring moments, the tranquil moments, and then on once again to the, you know, the great finale. So that's what I would say, the Emperor Concerto.
Great.
Wow.
I love
Nice.
it. Yes, music has a way of just setting the tone, getting us,
Yes.
getting the mind right.
Which is not to say that I don't love turning on turning on Jazz FM, you know, as I'm driving around today, mainly because, you know, it's really hard to find a downer piece in jazz. It always lifts you up. It always does. So highly recommended.
Right.
Great.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank you so much, Janette. It was so great to talk to you today. Thank you for taking the time. Best of luck for CanArb Week. We won't be able to make it this year in person, but definitely next year.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right.
Thank you very much, Janette, for being with us today for another episode of Arbitration Life.
For more Arbitration Life, be sure to hit the subscribe button and follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter.